what I'd focus on today isn't so much just the technology. I would focus on trust, the word trust. Whatever I do with this, you be sure that you're building trust with your customer or employees, whoever it is, on the other side.
You're listening to How to Make a Leader, a leadership development podcast from Big Think Plus, where we take the best ideas from the biggest minds in learning and development and distill them into actionable insights. I'm your host, Hannah Beaver. They say the only constant in life is change. Faced with constant change, how do leaders grow their fledgling startups to global businesses? How do they navigate industry upheavals and keep their team inspired, motivated, and focused on their collective vision? In a word, trust. For today's episode, I spoke with Ginni Rometty, who is the 9th Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of IBM. Named Fortune's #1 most powerful woman 3 years in a row, Ginni is a leader, innovator, and convener who believes that how we work and lead is as important as what we achieve, an idea that she crystallized in her book, Good Power. Across its pages, Good Power makes it clear that an ability to build trust with your reports is a critical skill shared among the world's top leaders. We'll start our conversation on the topic of her debut book and the motivations that led her to write it. What inspired you to write Good Power?
I never intended to write a book, actually. And actually, a little bit of time went by when I was retiring and people urged me to write it. And I had thought about my journey and reflected on it, having been abandoned as a child. I think you know my personal story. And I only wanted to do it if it could be in service of other people and people could learn from it. And so when you say, what inspired me to write it, it was the idea that so many of the lessons I learned when I was young, they stayed with me and they scaled over time. You could do really hard things in this day and age, but you can do them in a positive way. And perhaps the biggest lesson being that how somebody leads is as important as what they accomplish. And so that's a lot of what inspired me to write the book that I hope is helpful to other people.
One key arc of your book is a section titled The Power of We. And this is my favorite section. I think very actionable lessons we can learn within that second section of the book. To give a high-level overview, could you share those 5 principles with the audience and maybe your reflection on how those principles really impacted the lens through which you approach leadership?
In the middle section called The Power of We, it's to me the great lessons I learned from people in revisionist history, retrospect, about how to change really tough things. In Power of We, meaning it's less about you now and more about other people. And as you said, she knows better to tell me real quick, do the 5 principles. The first one, which is to be in service of something, which is very different than serving something. Because when you're in service of, you put the other person or thing's needs before your own, and you trust as a result of doing that, yours will be fulfilled. But it's a powerfully motivating way to make a change. The second lesson I learned was that it's building belief is an endless thing you have to focus on. And to do it means you have to appeal to people's hearts and their minds at the same time to get them to want to go to an alternate reality than the one they know today. The third principle then says, and when you change something, be sure you recognize not only what must change, but what must endure. Often the endure part's overlooked, and it may just mean it has to be modernized, but it is at its heart what makes you, you. And I got in trouble when I would drift too far away from that. True for a person, true for a company. Mm-hmm. Then the fourth one, very timely. Now, it's a topic I've written about for 10 years, but it's like on everyone's minds right now. It's called stewarding good tech, that we are all stewards of good tech, not just tech companies. And the net of that is it's important to manage not just the upside of technology, but the downside and do it at the same time. And again, we tend to focus on all the ups, but the downside's way too late. I mean, just look at social media. And then the fifth principle, when all said and done, when you do hard things, it's about being resilient, which relies on 2 things, relationships and your attitude.
In her nearly 40 years at IBM, Ginni led the company through several pivotal moments, including IBM's acquisition of PricewaterhouseCoopers Consulting. It was a relationship she forged, strengthened by trust, that made those key moments successful. To build those relationships, Ginni used a concept she identifies as building belief. Here she is to explain that concept. So you define the notion of building belief to be the heart of good power and the vital how of how to influence your team and build followership. Can you speak to some of the foundational elements of building belief, and what can this look like in practice?
I got the both honor, the privilege to work with so many great people. When it came to building belief, probably some of the most meaningful lessons I got was when I managed the integration when IBM acquired PricewaterhouseCoopers, and IBM's consulting business. They were equally large, 30,000 each. And I tried to fill that chapter with some habits and approaches, things that I think everyone could take. So as an example, when you're going to do something really hard, one of the principles would be, or lessons I learned, was to co-create it, meaning it's not about you sitting off some side coming up with the idea. So when I merged two units, I could have said, in some cases we were clear, take one way or the other way of doing things, adopt and go. But there were many things that there wasn't a right and a wrong. They were just different. And I think in today's world, that's a really important thing to find a third way through. So there's not a winner, there's not a loser, because they were both right of doing something one way or the other, but compromise. So you had to find a third way through. So this idea to co-create that way with people, then enlist their support. One of the second things was to personalize everything. And that idea of personalization to me is really critical because that gets to the heart of head and heart when you're trying to speak to people about how to change things. And again, I'll just use that merger as an example. It was very personal to me too, because it would be one of the biggest assignments I would get in the company. So this was going to be make or break. And I was honest with people. I said, look, me too. You feel at risk. I do too. If this doesn't work, well, I will probably be doing something else in another place at another time. And it was never as a threat. It was very personal. And it was also very personal that I understood for every one of them, what they were giving up coming into something, both ways. So this idea of personalizing in a million ways, to me, speaks to people's hearts. And then the third thing I learned, and I have to tell you, first I heard it from Ken Chenault, who ran American Express. He said, look, the job of a leader is to paint reality and give hope. And I can remember I was giving a talk someday because I would come back to that touch tone so many times when I would do something hard about building belief, because it's not about rah, rah, because that people are like, no, that's not what I'm experiencing. You can't say that. I would Google it. It was actually Napoleon who said it. I had to tell Ken, he's got to say Napoleon. But the point would be, I had to be brutally honest of what went well, but then there was always a way forward, and it's that paint reality. So be honest, because people appreciate that honesty and then that hope about where it is you go from here. So those would be three kind of, I think, practical things when you're leading and doing tough stuff that if you just keep coming back to, they helped me through every hard thing I ever did.
Transforming a business and keeping up with current trends of the industry is more than stating we were once this and we're now that. So as a leader, what are the vital questions that one must ask when leading a team or an organization through a period of change?
I kind of briefly mentioned it when I said the principles. Here's my most important one that stays in my mind is ask not just what should change, but what should endure. And when you talk about what to change, there are tensions to manage. So we could come back to that, but fine. It's usually easy to say, oh, what do we have to change? What do we have to change about what we make, what we do? But then we don't often ask what should endure. And I would get in the most trouble, as I mentioned, when I would get far away from that topic. I can remember very competitive. You might be able to sense that even already. And we were doing work for Marriott, and the CEO of Marriott I knew well. And I called him and I said, Arnie, and Arnie has passed now. He's a great leader. And I said, Arnie, this little marketing project, we really want it. Here's all the reasons. And I always remember the conversation. He said to me, Ginni, stop. Just be the best IBM you can be. I thought to myself, I can still hear Arnie's voice. And it was like, why do you care about this little thing? You do all this mission critical work for me. And it was this idea of, okay, what had to endure was my mission critical core essence of my work. And everything else, if it got too far from that, it may have had to be modernized, but be sure what endures about you. Some people, it's their values. It could be what you do, how you do it. Trust had to endure. And so I would learn to focus as well on the endure part. So the question to ask yourself is, what has to endure, even if it has to be modernized? And then the second part, if I can put a companion answer, is back to that point of, It's not just what you do and change, how work gets done. And I see this in a lot of companies right now. You'll hear talks of layoffs and we have to be efficient. And, if you just tell people be more efficient, it's not going to happen. Yes, you will get things on the edges. But I learned, telling the whole workforce, go faster, go faster. Because we could feel the intensity of having to change when all these new companies were sprouting up. And I kind of realized after a year, I'm like, they're not going faster, but they're more tired. And it really sunk into me that, part of a leader's job is to change how work can get done in a company. Like the team doesn't wake up in the morning and go, hey, let's be slow today. It's the things you put around them that make that happen. So whether it's rules or layers or processes or whatever it is, and that takes management to help move and change some of that stuff. And so focusing on how work got done, for us, it would take us, and no, this is 2012, as you know, Hannah, so this is back, it would take us on a journey of agile and design thinking at scale of hundreds of thousands of people. We would be some of the first to do that. And this idea of consumerism, but in a business world, and it would take us down those journeys. So how work got done got changed, and then the skills of the team that had to be changed for the future. So I would focus on what would endure, how work got done, and the skills of the team would be the more important questions than just what it is you go make.
One way that Ginni manifests trust is in her approach to continuous learning. As a leader, she has identified a change in the way that hiring decisions are made. Instead of putting faith in traditional forms of qualification, a college degree, for example, she puts her trust in people who have the skills that she needs. And in almost all cases, the primary skill that she is looking for is an ability to learn and adapt to change. It's very clear that you're a champion of lifelong learning still. So what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned as a leader working to reskill or upskill your employees?
First lesson as a leader, access and aptitude are entirely two different things. Aptitude spread evenly in the world. So think about that when you go to look for employees, but access is not spread equally, or opportunity is not. And I would learn that in going to hire cyber people when it was a new burgeoning industry and it didn't even exist yet. And I would find, just through serendipity, through work we did in corporate social responsibility with some schools in very low income neighborhoods, high schools with community college, we would fall upon a model of 6-year high schools. I won't tell you the whole story, but it would show me, wait, these are great employees. I have to change because I only hire college degree people right now. But if I change my requirements and write them for skills, I just happen to hire them at a different starting point. And it would give me a more inclusive, diverse workforce. It would lead me, second learning, skills first, I call it today, meaning hire someone for their skills, not just their degree. When you consider that 65% of people in developed countries do not have a college degree, 80% of Black Americans don't have a college degree. Yet they've got the aptitude, just did not have the access. So that idea, where you start, should not determine where you have to end. We just have different starting points. My next thing on skills would say, okay, well, that means I better build new pathways. I can't just have college degrees as the only pathway into my company. And by the way, different conversation, we would prove that people would be equally successful, by the way. So we don't have to talk about, this wasn't to dumb down a workforce. It was a skills-based workforce. And I also think what I would focus on today, running a company, is that I'd look at my HR team and say, I need you to focus on building skill, not buying skill, because the rate technology is moving, and as a silver thread in all our jobs, we will all have to learn a new skill every 3 to 5 years. So all of a sudden, it's not once and done anymore. So this would then change. My last lesson would be about hire for someone's propensity to learn, not for what they know in the moment.
With the speed at which technology is changing, leaders like Ginni must cultivate the ability to change with it. Here's Ginni Rometty one more time to talk about the importance of how leaders earn consumer trust as new changes and technologies present themselves. During your tenure at IBM, you not only led the company through transformational technological change. Today, it's hard to ignore the recent buzz around ever-developing AI technologies. So what wisdom would you impart on leaders who are trying to navigate the ethical challenges that new technology presents? And I guess in essence, that question would be, how do we harness the power of technology for good?
I absolutely am a believer that this technology can bring more good than harm if we bring it into the world safely. And that's an if. And I was on this topic, kind of 10 years ago. You got to state your principles and live by them. So for us, the principles were things like, number one, the technology is to augment mankind, not to hurt it. And that isn't just for the guys building it. It's for any of you using it. Think about how you're using it. The second is be clear who owns the data and how they benefit from it. And the third was, probably most important, transparency in the technology and free of bias and explainable. All that gets to is a short answer to your question is, what I'd focus on today isn't so much just the technology. I would focus on trust, the word trust. Whatever I do with this, you be sure that you're building trust with your customer or employees, whoever it is, on the other side. And that is what worries me the most about right now with ChatGPT, how it was just unleashed like that, which with some small voices saying, oh, be careful, it's not always right. It can't solve everything. Don't do something important with it. But that got drowned out by hype. And to bring something safely into the world like this technology, it will matter how it's trained, how it's introduced, give it guardrails, the problems it should be used for, what it should not be used for. And the challenge we have right now is, it took Netflix 3.5 years to get to 1 million users. It took chat 5 days. So now it's democratized, yet people aren't clear. And I don't want to kill it for the good things it can do when people get frustrated. It's one thing to use it for healthcare. One thing to pick a movie with it. Okay, don't care if it's wrong. I learned that through my experience with AI. People have a very different tolerance, even if it's better than what us as humans can do, very different tolerance to being wrong for really important personal issues than for kind of general things. And if you're a company, big companies are going to get much smaller leeway when it comes to breaking trust with their customers than a small company. And so your brand promise is at the heart of it. So the answer to this whole question, if I had one word, it is trust is the word to take away what to work on. And we all have to be stewards of good tech.
I learned a lot from my conversation with Ginni, and it was fascinating to hear her lessons in leadership learned during her 8 years at the helm of one of the biggest global technology companies in the world. With leadership lessons in mind, I recently attended ATD 24, the Association for Talent Development's annual conference that brings together over 9,000 learning and development professionals. I spoke with L&D folks on the expo floor about the top leadership traits that they believe will need to be developed over the next 5 years. I heard themes emerge around digital fluency and building employee motivation, but just like Ginni's forward-looking philosophy on leadership development, several of the people I spoke to had the concept of trust top of mind. People like Anne Creedy, a strategic business partner for the Center for Creative Leadership, who stressed a critical need for trust to create an environment where people can communicate openly and provide constructive feedback.
It's the foundation. And how are we creating psychological safety and trust through the way in which we communicate? And I think that is ground zero. When we kind of zoom out and we look at the macro level in terms of what kind of conditions do leaders, or rather organizations, need to cultivate for leaders, and where they need to emphasize, it's on vertical development, because it's about that mindset expansion. Yeah. It's about organizational and psychological safety, as all those challenges are coming at them. What is the organization's relationship with the people within it, and how are they building trust? And maybe the most compelling is this environment of continuous learning agility. And how are we learning from the bumps and mistakes that we're making and the great triumphs that we have, but how are we together as a collective pulling all those insights together in order to get better and better every time something new comes at us?
I also spoke to LaDonna Hendricks, the Senior Director of Training for Freeman, who echoed the importance of trust, particularly in the face of change.
Yeah, I think trust is always a big one.
Yeah.
Especially with the change in the environment, you always have to have trust. You always have to have empathy as well. I think that's another key one. Communication, because if you don't communicate effectively what you want from your employees, it's not going to work as well. And then I think just really having a growth mindset, because we're constantly changing and everything's always changing.
Yeah.
That if a leader doesn't have a growth mindset, then they can't move forward and their team can't move forward. So those are probably the top 4 that I think we should always keep our eye on. And the growth mindset will always be something that we need to have. If not, we're always going to stay stagnant.
Always learning, always growing.
Always learning, always growing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For more from Ginni Rometty, check the show notes for a link to her book and to listen to our full conversation. And for more from How to Make a Leader, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next month and every month with more big insights and ideas from another L&D leader. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time as we learn how to make a leader.